Okay, good morning. Probably. Hello, everyone. My name is Atsushi Tajima, and I'm serving as a professor at the Faculty of Life and Environmental Sciences, University of Tsukuba. And my specialty is animal reproductive biology. Throughout my career, I've been working on development of biotechnology to improve the efficiency of animal reproduction. But when I was working on this, came across with, and I was giving a lecture on the various levels of the university. I came to the point to that that's really what we eat is depend on environment. Environment means our surrounding environment. And it's deeply related to the ethical problem also. So I was talking with Daryl about these things, and he was interested about those, and here I am. So I started talking about the title of my talk today is what to eat from an eco-geological perspective, and taking Japan as an example. So those who came to Japan, has experienced to stay in Japan, this type of food looks familiar with you. And this is reflecting what our cultural background, and also that's really related to our social system also. First, this is rice and miso soup, and natto, this is fermented soybean. And the miso soup, miso is fermented soybean also, it's a curd. And salted salmon, this is fish. And pickles, and dried seaweed, nori, and raw egg. Some of you are not familiar with raw egg, but it is very common in Japan to have raw egg added with soy sauce and topping to the rice. And this is one of the typical set of Japanese dishes. And the reason for this kind of food exists in Japan is really dependent on where we are. And we have 4 distinct seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. But our latitude is a little bit high, so our latitude is 35.4. That means we do not really have a production during the winter. So our culture was developed based on the fact that we have only one harvest in the fall, like September, and then we have to preserve them until next harvest. And we don't have too much agricultural product between like October to June, July. So autumn and the harvest in the autumn and store until next harvest really gave the background of the Japanese culture. And that means we have to save the food until the next harvest. And also the efficient use of the soybean is the key of our dishes. So looking from this point of view, this is a very interesting set of dish, because rice, we can preserve if the moisture content of the rice is down to like between something 10 to 20%. And this is salted salmon. And before the electricity was available, the salted salmon was really salty. We just preserved them only a salt. So it was very salty. And if we eat a piece of this salted salmon, then we have to eat a bunch of rices. And so this is again the preserved dish. And soybean natto and the soybean miso soup. It is again the fermentation. The fermentation, as you can see a lot of fermentation products all over the world. that it is very suitable for it is for preserved food. And pickles also, this is fermented product. And nori, this is dried seaweed, is also dried. So except raw egg, every of these foods are, it is possible to preserve. This is what the nature of the food in Japan. When I visited, like East Asian country, like in Thailand, I was really astonished to see that when I was running the road, on the right side of the road, the people are harvesting the rice, whilst on the other side, on the left side, the people are planting rice. And that's never happened in Japan. So they do not have to preserve or save a massive amount of rice because they have constant production of rice. But in Japan, we only have one harvest, so that we have to save them, we have to preserve, store them until next harvest. That same thing happened for the preserved the fishes or preserved vegetables. So the nature of this food, except for the raw egg, this is a preserved food. So that makes Japanese food very, very special. The reason for this is where we are, we're right about 50-60 kilometers off Tokyo, northeast of Tokyo. We are located here. The reason for our food culture is the presence of the Pacific Oceans and a huge continent. And we have the rainfall from this one during the summer and a very strong wind from Siberia in the north. And they absorb moisture when they're passing Sea of Japan, and then have a lot of snow on this side and then very dry wind on the other side. So that makes the Japanese culture very, very different among the regions. So may I ask you to the questions here, because this is I'm taking Japan as example. But if you are staying in other places all over the world, this is going to be really a fundamental questions. So maybe it's very interesting for you to describe where are you with the longitude, latitude, and elevation. That is the primary determinant of the climate. And also temperature and precipitation, annual change of the precipitation and temperature, and source of sugar, which is carbohydrate, and source of protein of the local cuisine. And this makes you can make a contrast with the Japanese food. So the first thing, what to eat, is affecting the climate. So this is, I took this picture from Google, and we have the Oceania, and then Africa, and India, Australia, and New Zealand. And as we see here, there's massive, like dry places, huge dry places here. And then this is green area, that means that the vegetations are rich. And this is low, the vegetation is limited. So if you see this, that the places, the dry area is very extended in quite period, and the places, and then the places where the vegetation is rich is fairly limited. Okay? And this is a place that knows the Southeast Asian countries, and and also India. And this is a place that really, in a sense, richest vegetation in the world, because the very warm climate and a lot of precipitation. That's the two factors. And if you go to west of the continent, then the precipitation is going to be reduced. And then if you go to north, the temperature is going to be reduced. So where we are living, what we eat is really dependent on what we can obtain from the nature. And this is US, and this is the US, the picture of the US. And this is very interesting. It's a big North America, the United States here, and eastern part of the US is green, and western part is relatively, it's not really green. That means the vegetation where the plant is rich in the eastern half, and the plant vegetation is limited, reduced in the eastern and the western part of the US. Like when I visited California, several years ago, the professor at UC Davis told me that it doesn't rain between April and July in Vegas, US. So it's very, very dry here. And if you go to like Georgia or Florida, there's a lot of, it's very warm, and the precipitation, there's a lot of precipitation there. So it's sort of rich in biological diversity, and that makes very, very, the climatic condition within the US is very diverse. So this is a classical classification of the climate, Kepler's climate classifications. And Group A, he divided the tropical, so Group B, dry, Group C, temperate, Group D, continental, and Group E, polar. And we don't have too much vegetation is polar, so we focus on these four groups. Now, this is a map, the global map of according to the Kepler-Geiger climate classifications. And like here, it's tropical rainforest here, and this is the dry places, and at the polar here. So along this is very warm, but this is very warm and high precipitation, warm and dry. So we can classify the climate into either warm and cold, and dry and wet. Then I'm an animal biologist, so I'm giving an example of what's happening to the food resources, in relation to the food resources. So this is a Group A. It's high temperature and high precipitation area. And in most of the world, if there's enough precipitation and the temperature is high, usually paddy rice is produced. This is typical area where paddy rice is produced. And usually this paddy rice production is associated with pig productions. And the reason is the pig is omnivorous animals, and they can eat and digest whatever leftover of the human activity, like leftover of the dishes, and sometimes human excrete also, they eat them and then recycle them so to the edible product. So this is our ancestor constructed the system to live together with a pig, except for the religious reason where the Muslim people they do not eat pork. But usually where the paddy rice is produced is associated with the pig production. A typical example is China. This typical Chinese meat is pork, and then rice and pork product, and together with the vegetables, that consists the major component of the Chinese dishes. And similar thing happened in Japan, with the wild boar production has been associated with. We've introduced rice production about 2,000 years ago from China, and then our country was, in a sense, 2,000 years of Japanese history is, in a sense, there's the history of expanding the paddy rice production from Kyushu to Hokkaido. So, and then also the pig production has been associated with the human movement. So usually this high temperature, high precipitation area is usually rice is production associated with pig productions. And second group is this group B, is high temperature and dry area. And this is the places where the really a human culture, or the agriculture was really developed to this area, but close to almost 10,000 years ago. And this is dry, and then they developed their culture along the river basins or where the any place where is abundant water. And usually, if there is grasses that grown, they took sheep over there and let them eat and converted the grasses, which is the cellulose, which human cannot digest, and let sheep eat, and then converted to the edible product. So, and then the people moved around where there are the grassland there are, and then they eventually developed a nomadic system. And together, and they used sheep meat for the protein sources, and then they sold the sheep whenever they need anything else, and they obtain whatever they need. So the nomadic cultures and sheep productions are very much related. And sheep is best suitable animal for the nomadic people. Not other animal, but it's sheep. It has a character that the animal the characteristics is most suitable for the nomadic people. And this is European countries. European countries, the latitude is very, very high, so that, and then also they located in the west part of the continent. That means they do not have so much precipitation during summer, and the highest temperature during summer is not very high. That means the production of the rice is not possible, and they have to rely on the pastures, and also the main grain will be a wheat, and they are associated with like cows or sheep, and then so that they in European culture they started to develop, and they developed the meal to using a milk product and meat and wheat. So. And this is interesting. I think this is the most interesting part of the world is India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. And this is the only place that I know of. If you know any places, let me know. Rice and wheat product and dairy product are eaten in the same dishes. Like in Japan, in Chinese culture, we do not really drink milk with rice. And in Europe, usually the bread and meat, bread and dairy product, animal product and bread is eaten together, but not with rice as a main meal. But in India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, and imagine in the Indian dishes, they have rice and chapati and drinking yogurt together in one dishes. And most likely, this is my assumption, that India, the eastern part of India, they are very suitable for the rice productions, but this is historically the migration of the Aryan people from the west, so they reached to India, and I would assume that these Aryan people brought the milk and wheat culture to India and merged with Indian local rice culture. So this is the only places in the world that eat rice and wheat product and dairy product together in one dish. And in India, the cattle is regarded as a sacred animal. So let's go back to the historical background of human history. Related to the food productions. About 10,000 years ago, after the end of the last glacial period, the human being did not really know how to grow grains on the ground or raise animals under human control. So they really dependent on the hunting and gathering. So whatever they want to eat, when they are hungry, they have to go around and find out whatever they can eat. And by about 5,000 years ago, the production system has divided into two major systems. One is nomadic way of the living, where they take animals wherever they are suitable to live, and the cultures that really related to animal productions. And one other strategy was farming. The farming is by nature is to cultivate land and produce the grains or corns, the rice or corns and wheat. And that means these are the property issue that comes out, like land ownership comes out. And also they really cannot move around because they cannot take land. So this nomadic way of culture and farming is really make a human way of living two different ways. And so the nomadic people really produce meat and milk, and the farming people started to raise grains, like major grains like wheat or corns and soybeans. So what to eat has a strong influence on the cultural development. Let's see, this is average annual temperature, and then the red dot is where the tropicals, the hot area, and if you go to north or the south, the temperature goes down. And this is precipitations. Sorry, this is in Japanese. This is in January, and I'm going to move on to every month. And by the way, this is the data from Japan Meteorological Association. So this is the rainy area. The blue dot is a rainy area in January, and it is very dry in this area in January. Now I will move on to February and March and stop at July. So this is February. So the rainy area goes toward north. So, and then Australia and New Zealand become dry period to July. So this is a place. These are the places in the world that produce rices, paddy rices, because we have a lot of precipitation, and then during the hottest season of the year is like July or August, and then we have a lot of precipitation that make rice more suitable grain to produce. So this area, the rice is the suitable grain to produce. And if you go to August, September, the rainy area shift towards, and then it becomes dry again. So now, taking Japan as an example, I took Japan as an example, but that shows that what we eat is influenced very strongly by the climatic conditions, and namely by temperature and precipitations. And this affects the type of grain to use to grow, and then this type the influence the type to the domestic animal to raise. And also comes to the point that the religion has a strong influence on the pattern of the meat consumption. Like the pig is in the Islamic country is not allowed to eat. One of the biggest reasons is the pig is not at all suitable for taking them together with a human. Among the domestic animals, the pig is least suitable animal for nomadic people. And also the cattle and pig, they need a lot of water. So the places where the pig and the cows are raised usually is a place where the water availability, the abundant water availability. So, and religion has a strong influence on the pattern of meat consumptions. So now, economical situations. Now, what's happened to Japan? Now, we've experienced a very rapid economical growth in the past 40 years, and this really changed the eating habit. By the way, this is the time when I was like three years old. This is current foreign currency. That this is how the economical development of Japan. This is the exchange rate to US dollar was 365 yen in this period, and now shifted to 300 yen. Right now it's at 100 something. So this shows the economical growth. And this is domestic production was reached in the 1980s and then started to decrease since then. But import is dramatically increased together with the increase of the gross GDP. So the culture was shifted from self-production of the agricultural product to import from the dollars or whatever the values that we gained from the industrial sector and started to buy agricultural product from the other countries. And this is grain import, soybean import, so the corn import, wheat and soybean import has increased this period. And rice production decreased quite significantly since 1970s. And so as wheat production, soybean production, corn production become very limited in Japan. So what to eat is influenced by political and economical situation. Or like, see, my age, I was in like 3 times. When I was a child, we've ate rice 3 times a day. But now in our school lunch, when my period, the government introduced a system of bread and milk. Since when there was a compulsory education, like 1960s. Right now, the government has changed the policy, and then about half of the school lunch between compulsory education is rice, and half of them as the bread and milk. So the rice consumption was decreased. One of the reasons is the introduction of the Western culture to eat bread or the noodles, and then increase of the animal product was associated with economical growth. But now, from the economical perspective, then importing cheap, like low price agricultural product is a logical choice. But from the ecological point of view, it's a little bit different. And this is statistics that shows that Japan, this is agricultural import of Japan since 1960s. Our agricultural import really increased quite a bit, together with our economic growth and the population growth, and reached to a maximum plateau of 1990s that we were every year we've been importing grains. This is food and feed for animals, except marine product. This is grains and whatever the human the product for the human consumptions and for the animal feed. So it reached to close to 60 million tons per year. But our export is limited to almost negligible level. What that means is, if suppose we are living in this kind of apartment house, and then just keep bringing in the food, and what's happened, we never discover. This is, economically it's logical, but ecologically it's unbalanced. We're just importing massive amount of agricultural product and feed for the animals, and then we really hear that Japan exported agricultural product in a massive amount to the other country. That means we're bringing into the nutrient, tremendous amount of nutrient every year to our country, and then never goes out. That means nutrient level in the overall country is increasing. This is not happening just in Japan, but like Japan, like 1960s, that this is a nitrogen excretion to the environment is increasing since 1960s, but like Korea also and Indonesia also, the nitrogen excretion to the environment has been increasing because two major factors. One is the population growth, and one is other is economical growth. And China also, it looks that the value is smaller, but like if you see that Chinese development, the development is really concentrated in the coast area, and then inland area is the development is limited. So, and then the land area is so big. So that superficially this decrease is not much Korea or Japan, but if you limit the area, like in the coastal area, this is going to be seems to be very high. So in the food import and import is having have to have the impact to the environment. On the other side, from the production side, the country that has a capability of exporting agricultural product is limited, like U.S., Brazil, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, and China probably, and Kazakhstan, and European countries. That means that the very few countries has a capacity to export food, and that resulted from the exporting country the soil degradations by nature. Like if you produce something, the agriculture product, and export to some other country, that means a nutrient is coming from the soil. So the exporting agriculture product is taking out the minerals and out of the soil, and then take them and then transfer to other country. That means the soil fertility is decreased with the time. So like North American area or Brazil's and like Asian countries and many this red area where the soil degradation becomes a serious issue. So like if you look just by the economical merit, the area that can produce food in the least expensive prices tend to the export is logical. But if you see the environmental aspect, then the simple economical logic is not is very dangerous. So this is, I do not get into the political side, but excess unidirectional agriculture trend is like for the importing country, eutrophication or the overnutrient of the environment is becoming very serious. And also for the exporting countries, soil erosions or salt accumulation going to be a serious problem in the long range. So in the 1960s, in 1962, Rachel Carson published a very famous book called Silent Spring. And what she wrote was in the US along the Great Lake Basin, application of agriculture, the fertilizer and the chemicals was really damaged the ecological ecology of the area. Now, it seems that we are facing to the other aspect of the ecological damage by failure of the circulation of nutrients. That means unidirectional excess agricultural trade result in accumulation of the nutrient in one part and depletion of the nutrient in that part. So it seems that excess unidirectional agricultural trade lead to the alternative silent stream. So agricultural trade has an economical merit for both exporting and importing country, but environmental demerit. So we have to balance them. So I would like to propose that when you're talking about sustainable agriculture, that means in the local environment, but we have to think about sustainable agriculture in the global sense to balance the nutritional flow of the exporting and importing countries. So this is my proposal, some kind of index or like upper limit of the unidirectional flow of the nutrient, and by considering the carrying capacity of the environment. So I'd like to close my talk by the fourth president of the United States that treat the earth well. It was not given to you by your parent. It was loaned to you by your children. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. And this is the proverb from the Native Americans. And I think we need to work on the balancing of the nutrient really for the sustainable development. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you very much, Atsushi. It was very interesting. And we start with questions from our colleagues. Well, I have one question to start with, and maybe you don't mind. So, when you talked about the traditional agricultural systems, so that you had the tradition of, for example, rice and pigs, or milk and crops. When we had the large immigrations of the people in the colonization and also in the 19th and 20th century, those people brought their foods or grains or their culture and religion to different lands. How did that affect the current situation? And it may have also led to an imbalance.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think is a very important issues. In case of Japan, like we have a lot of influence from Korea and China, and then we have a very strong influence from Korea and China, and we learned a lot. But now, after several thousand years, we've, I think, developed our own system adapted the system to fit into the Japanese culture. And honestly saying, Japan do not really have experience of massive one-time immigrations. So probably, now what's happened to Japan from now, this is what we are facing. Okay, this is what we are facing now. The population of Japan peaked at 2004. Population of Japan peaked at 2004, 127 million. And then we're expecting to decrease up to less than half by 2100. And this is I think this is really related to what your question is. That this is a political decision. How to maintain our production system with decreasing populations. And one of the things that we're going to face is to introduce a lot of immigrants to support the industry. And that's what's really we're going to face this problem. Okay, like in European countries, they've accepted so many immigrants from many countries, and then, but it seems that they've adjusted they maintain their own culture, but politically they have a lot of problem by increasing the immigrants. But they've been handling very well. Like US, by definition, US is a land of immigrants, so they probably accepting so many people that then they develop a culture. So I think that I cannot really have one simple answer to your question. It's depend on which cultural background you are, and then acceptability. I think at this moment, Japan acceptability of immigrant is really low, but we have to increase them. But European countries, they've been working for many years, and they seems that they have a system. I don't know what's going to happen to from now, but they seems to have a system accepting of the immigrant, they continuously upgrading. So I think it's depend on the place where you are, but this is what we're going to face from now.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it is often political questions as well. Questions from our colleagues on Skype? Andrew, it's good to see you. What do you think about the economics of this? Neda also did a PhD in economics.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello. Ro, please go ahead.
Hello. I'm wondering through listening to your lecture that how you have been improving your study that your topic is not the economy but also philosophical approach have been introduced. I'm personally interested in your research background, how you have been reached out up to now.
Well, tell the truth, I'm not a specialist in this area. But while I started my career from very technological aspect, like in vitro fertilizations, or embryo transfer, or conservation of animal genetic resources by manipulation of the germ cells. That's my research topic. But when I was doing this research, I mean giving lectures to the young student, like, look at the technology, it's okay, but what for? That's the question that raised to me. And fortunately, I've been to many countries. I had the opportunity to live in France for 3 years when I was a child, and I had a chance to study at US for 5 years. And after getting a position up here, I had the opportunity to visit so many countries in the world. But as an animal scientist, I felt at the beginning, when I started to learn animal science in Japan, I felt very uncomfortable because this is not the area of the Japan itself. It is very introduced from other country in the past 100 years. And my interest shifted. I had both interests, but my interest, I was interested in where the animal production is really started. And then that came to the the point that West Asia, like Tigris and Euphrates River Basin, is really origin of the nomadic culture, and where they also successfully in producing wheat and barley. So this, in particularly like in Iraq, that area is a center of the civilization. Now, currently, politically, they're in a very difficult situations, but this is a place that human developed how to produce our food. So I think we have to respect them culturally, but politically or economically, that area is experiencing a very difficult time these days. But we have to respect that West Asian region for the inventions of producing food by our own self. And so from these perspectives, and this related to the religions, it's very much related to the religions, because like the Old Testament is really was the story of the place, the people who were living in the dry places, and then also the nomadic people. And like in our culture, we have a very old novels, and that's the history of Japan. That's coming from like our ancestor. I mean, this is the tale, but the heaven, the God in the heaven, came down to Japan carrying the rice plant. So our culture is really related to rice productions, and our emperor system is really a saver. He is a supporter of the rice productions. So he always, our emperor, plant rice in the spring and harvest in the autumn. That's it being in the news. So I started my career with a very limited area of animal science, but it's come to know the question of what I'm doing in Japan, and also what has been in other parts of the world. That's my background. Did I answer the question?
Thank you, very understandable. Very appreciate for your detail.
Do we have other questions or comments? Andrew, would you like to speak?
Well, I just wanted to appreciate that answer. We always debate whether or not ethics are part of an ideological system, or what seems to be the case in bioethics quite often is that it's the result of practical situational contexts, and we adapt and integrate it into our cultural systems. But thank you for the very interesting lecture.
Thank you very much.
And Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself and also a little bit about what you have been working on? Because I think some of the discussion that Atsushi talked about in terms of global economic modelings and the future of sustainability of the whole system, this is something which Professor Tatum is very interested in as well.
Certainly. I mean, the trends right now seem to be that the deflationary nature of agriculture over the long term and the macro has created, systemic problems, because we have to constantly subsidize farming when in fact it might be easier to decouple agriculture and food sustainability from global markets. Because of course, once a product enters the global market chain, it's subject to all the other contextual aspects and pressures put on by monetary policy around the world. And of course, that's a globalized, unified system that stresses every country. I think there's some good research and direction coming out of the EU right now. They just released a report and funding, 30 billion in funding, to start looking more at circular economies. And we really have to understand just the logistics of agriculture a lot more. But yeah, very interesting topic. Thank you very much.
Do you have any reflections on that?
Well, I'm not an economist, so I cannot really talk really about I'm talking about more the global census or rather than the real theoretical economical basis, but I think everything is related. The politics is also related, economics is related, but overall trade has to be based on we have to consider the economical merit and demerit together with the economical merit and demerit. That's my. We have to develop a system to integrate the ecological aspect into the economical aspect, probably. Yes. I don't know what the current situation
In
is.
the previous discussion we've had, you talked about the introduction of the beef cow into Japan to improve nutrition. Could you describe that? And then, is the beef industry subsidized as compared to the rice? And how does that work in Japan?
Beef industry.
The beef.
Wow.
So, because the introduction of beef by, I think, in the 19th century, to increase the strength of nutrition. That was very interesting, and its origins and then how it's developed now.
It's going to be a little bit of the historical thing.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. The year 1868 is one of the turning points for Japan. Year 1868, and this is a time when the shogun period, like monopoly period, was terminated and turned to more democratic society. 1868, we had a very big revolution, and new government, Meiji government, was established that time. And before that period, we closed our country for more than 200 years, and it was really a peaceful time. We do not have war during that period. And after opening the country, we have very limited contact with other country except from the Netherlands. Dejima, yes. So we've seen the world. So it is very small window through Netherlands. That's all. And we really do not have a trade or contact with other country more than 200 years. Now, after opening the country, the Meiji government really has astonished that one of the things is the world trade has really become a big issue. Like many of the European countries has used a ship to trade, and then also the colonizations of the world was taking place. And after opening the country, the major concern of the Meiji government, the new government, was how to avoid the colonization by European countries and US. And what the government did was militarization. And so militarization was a major issue to avoid the colonization of Japan from Western countries. One of the things is, of course, militarization. So the Japanese government introduced a lot of the Western military system, including the ship and railway system, whatever the system that makes Japan compete with Western countries in arm, in force. And the other aspect was improving of the human itself, because the protein. And as soon as the Western medical system has been introduced in the Meiji period, then the people soon recognized that the protein intake was insufficient for the Japanese people. And the Japanese government started to increase the production, animal production. And this is, from animal scientist point of view, this is a human breeding. And like in an animal breeding program, we have the genetics and environment. So what we have is inheriting is the genetics, and what we the supporting area is called environment, and including like nutrition. So the Meiji government recognized that what is limiting the body size of the Japanese people was very, very small that period. So the Meiji government has recognized the necessity of improving the physical ability of the soldiers. And so that the Japanese government decided to increase the animal productions by introducing the animal industry and develop like veterinary schools, and also horse racing. In that period, the horse was a major issue, so the horse productions and animal production to increase the animal proteins. And that's what, like Tokyo University Veterinary School was really a training program for the horse veterinarians and also the cow diseases. And since that time, until 1960s, 50s, 60s, the goal of the nutrition is to, the nutrition point from the Ministry of Health, Public Health, is to how to balance the carbohydrate consumptions and animal product and vitamins and the minerals. And in 1950s or 1960s, the Japanese government really promoted people to eat more meat and eggs and animal product. The government developed a caravan and then toured around the countries to teach the people how to cook eggs or meat to the public. And so that's really increased the meat and the dairy product consumption, but it was associated with a decrease of the rice consumption.
Do you have any pictures of that?
I have to find out later on.
Yeah.
So this is the Japanese government was to, at the beginning, is to knowing that the protein intake was very low in the traditional Japanese dish. So by increasing the protein intake, the government tried to increase the body size of the Japanese people to train the strong soldiers. That was the main motivation of the Meiji government. And like Japanese beef production these days is very, very special. That's maybe you heard about the Kobe beef. It's a very, very unusual type of beef which has a lot of fat in the muscles. And fat in the muscles is very unusual physiologically because this is straighted muscle is for locomotions, and fat is for storing the energy, and that doesn't go well. So, but Japanese black, the breed characteristic of the Japanese black, they have a lot of the fat that they have the genetic character that to store fat in the muscular, and then the people really developed the breeding program to increase the intramuscular fat depositions. And so, like if you come to Japan and see the Kobe beef, it's like so-called highest Kobe beef is really probably more fat than the muscles. So that's the very special, very interesting and very different part from many other countries, that lean meat is a value. Yeah.
Yes, and also links to public health as well. If you have too much fat in your meat,
So that people started to recognize that what is the real taste of the meat. And then our activity at here is to try to improve the lean meat quality of the Holstein steers, Holstein castrated males. So that is supporting the dairy industry by increasing the income out of the dairy steers. So
Do you have some cows here?
yes, we have Holstein steers, the castrated males, and also Holstein heifers. Yeah, yes.
Do we have other comments from our colleagues?
Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself last time.
Yeah.
And I have a follow-up question to that last comment on the Kobe or on the Kobe beef there. So my name is Andrew Bosworth, and I'm a Canadian. I studied with Daryl, or I worked with Daryl at UNESCO as an intern when he was the regional director of the social science division. And I wrote on biodiversity, and I have, like you, I have meandering interests. I like many things, but I focus on economics and agriculture too. And what you mentioned about the Kobe beef brings up one of the fundamental debates that is going on right now.
What is? Will you
A
please?
fundamental debate, you go ahead.
Fundamental debate. What he said, fundamental debate. What is it?
By specialization
Uh-huh.
and labor, but not land. And now there is a new trend, reinsert the importance of land into the equation of creating value and wealth. And what we see in this example is perfect because
Andrew, try the question again. We're losing your voice.
you know, specialization of production to create new wealth and value, but at the cost of ethics and land and many things. So
The voice is interrupting.
and we need the ability to produce that, and then we can reassess the values and ethics of it. Thank you so much again.
Andrew, can you type your question as well? And maybe, what was the key question that we lost? It was going up and down a little. You talked about value in land, but we didn't catch, there was a word drop.
I'm sorry, okay, so what I wanted to do was point out how the equation of producing wealth and value under Adam Smith. He took out land. What we see with this example is that, in fact, to consider land with to create value via specialization of production is also linked to ecological considerations and peace. Because if we didn't have we wouldn't have the importation of cows, we wouldn't have the destruction of certain types of crops and land, and we certainly wouldn't have this hyper-specialization in Kobe beef. So it's a long trajectory, and it's gone full cycle, and now we can reassess it, this time with the impacts on
He's saying that Kobe beef is producing the limited land.
So maybe, Andrew, it's better that you type your comment, because I always lose it. We lost some important words in your comments there.
No.
Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so type the question, because it's very intriguing, but we lost some key parts about it. Okay. Are there other questions or comments? And Kako, welcome. Do you have any from a social science perspective? Or identity questions? Nilta, anything from Brazil? What is it? Go ahead. Nilta. do you have any questions?
No, I was I'd like to have the presentation.
The PowerPoint I was sent, yeah.
Was borrowed because some of the maps I wish I could see more details, and special terrain or the dry stuff, especially in the climatic changes. But anyway, I have no chance this time.
Thank you, Doctor. Yeah. It was interesting how the seasonality, that was an average rainflow, but then we have seasonal, and then we have things like El Nino, which affect climate as well, and how this, and also the consumer markets. For example, California produces so much of the food and produce,
but they're using the underground water.
They're using underground water.
That's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable.
Also, the California is producing Rolls Royce, which is a very famous brand, but they cannot expand because of the shortage of water.
Yeah.
So, but in Arkansas, it's less famous, but they are more have the precipitation. So, from our point of view, like we have a limited importation of rice. Probably the California is not really an issue, but like Arkansas or those areas, so they have a capacity to expand the rice paddy field for the strategic reason. So our concern is, do they expand rice production in Arkansas?
Or for the Japanese rice farmers.
That's right. From the Japanese point of view. But the famous brand is California Rolls Royce, but they do not have the capacity to expand because of the shortage of water. And then I would think that in the western part of the U.S., the underground water level is decreasing. So in the long range, I don't know how long, but in the long range, we have to, or they have to think what's happened if sometime in the future, if the underground water is depleted. That's very dangerous.
Yes, the water levels. And in China, of course, too, the groundwater is decreasing.
Yes.
Growing population pressures may be one of the big things.
And there's too much, like, by definition, like big city like Tokyo, the nutrition accumulation is tremendous. So the environmental stress, I mean, they eventually going down to the ocean anyway. So overpopulated area where the animals is concentrated, then it has a tremendous impact in the long range.
The intensification of agriculture is not sustainable, I guess, as well.
Or like we have to take part in some way or another, like for the circulation of the materials, nutrient. It has to be going back to the production of the nutrient product, the nutrient output product has to return to the production site one way or the other in order to be really sustainable.
And then also you have the question of aquaculture. It wasn't in your chart, but depletion of fishing stock is another big issue.
A big issue too. That's I'm not really specialist in that area, but we are, Japan is one of the world the highest consumption of fish and fish product, and the depletion of the fish resources is really a scary things for the. It's a very, very dangerous issue.
So I'm going to read Andrew's comment here. Here we see a great example of how the current debate in economics, a reassessment of land as the basis for wealth creation, which was excluded in favor of only specialization in labor, is relevant. War caused the importation of cows, which disrupted food patterns, and created ecological pressures. Kobe beef is a natural extension of this ideology. If we reassess the cost of this decision with land use issues, the ethics and values demonstrate the higher cost of doing so. Adam Smith would have agreed with Kobe beef as a perfect product. In the future, we may not, due to the additional cost considerations. That was Andrew's comment.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. It's Tara.
Yeah, can I read it? I couldn't get the point. Kobe beef is what?
It's an example of Adam Smith's.
Is an example of?
Can you read?
Yeah, I'm reading. We see great example how the current debate in economic reassessment of land at the base of wealth creation, which was excluded in favor of only special division labor and is relevant. Foreign causes importation of cow, which disrupted food patterns and created. Cow beef is a natural extension of this ideology. If we reassess the cost of acquisition of land use and ethics, this is difficult. And the cost of terrain, so Adam Smith would have agreed Kobe beef as a perfect product in the future.
That's Andrew's comments, yeah.
He support the production of Kobe?
Well, so Andrew, I think Andrew is questioning whether it's good, yeah.
In the future, we may not do the additional cost consideration.
So we might have to change. So Andrew, how would you? So Andrew's working on the modern. He thinks the current system will collapse, and so.
Is he saying that Kobe beef
is an example of Adam Smith's ideology? He doesn't necessarily support that ideology. In fact,
he doesn't support.
No, but and I think
I'm neutral. I'm just putting two ideas out there.
Okay.
I've had beef in my life.
Okay. Yeah.
As an animal scientist, okay.
Yeah.
Kobe beef is very unnatural. But as a professor of animal science, probably I cannot really say that in public.
Yeah.
That's my position. Physiologically, Kobe beef is very, very unusual, and economically speaking, this is really a technical problem, but the growth rate to produce Kobe beef, like if you usually the cows gain about 1 kilograms of up to 50%. Okay, if we feed 1 kilograms of feed, then the cow grow, usually regular cow grow about 50% of the grain, means 500 grams, 50%. That is feed efficiency. Now, at the finishing period, when the Kobe beef is produced, we have to feed about 15 to 16 kilograms of grains in order to increase 1 kilograms. That's feed efficiency is less than half of the regular beef productions.
Which is already not good.
What?
Yeah, which is already bad enough.
That's right. Already bad enough. So, physiologically speaking, where the fat is deposited, there's a the sequence, like here, or abdominal fat, or belly, and in intestinal fat depositions, and the order of the fat deposition at the last is that muscle. So muscular fat deposition occur at the last in the order.
In the order, in the
So
body.
where there's no other fat to deposit and then goes to muscle. That makes very, very inefficient as far as feed conversion, to how much feed is converted to meat or how much feed is converted to fat. The feed conversion is really bad. So like a country that importing tremendous amount of feed for animals, from ethical point of view, it's very bad. I think. But as long as the consumer prefer the highest grade marbled Kobe beef, then that's economics. The industry is designed to grade the highly marbled, highly marbled meat as a high quality. Then the producer or the market has a motivation to produce those things. But from the ecological point of view or physiological point of view, it's not healthy for both cows and for human. And second, from the agricultural system, it's waste of feed in one respect. So I have two phases. One is a person who is working on animal production. I cannot say this in public.
In Japan.
In Japan. If I say this, probably
It's on YouTube. Maybe.
But in the reality, this is industry is working in that aspect. So it's have two totally different perspectives.
Yeah. So in fact, he's not neutral, because from a sustainability perspective, probably we can't be neutral about this. Would it ever be possible for a grass-fed Kobe cow to become like that or not? Because
Okay, by definitions, glass do not have enough energy. Like glass is cellulose,
yeah,
and cellulose, and then grain is starch, right? And digestibility of the cellulose compared with the starch is so low. And starch is really very high, very easy to digest, but cellulose is very difficult to digest. So as far as the production of the Kobe beef, I do not think it's possible at this moment to produce a highly marbled meat with grass-fed, because you have to supply easy digestible glucose.
What about pork? Pork can be marbled, yeah,
Yes, in Japan, yes,
because
yes. And then in the Japanese pork market, the people are directed to produce marbled pork. That's another thing.
it's also by
It's grain.
grain.
Yeah, the pork usually it's also they are really grain eaters. They are really grain eaters, and the chicken too. Chicken and pig are grain eaters. So they are raised in Japan as mostly by imported grains.
But chickens, we don't call them marbled chicken
That's right.
because I can't see it, or
That's
because
right. At this moment, probably it's not feasible. Probably. But we have different. In case of chicken, we have different directions. Like in Akita, they have Hinaitoi, which is a local breed, and they are limiting the experimental station in Akita Prefecture developed a really special type of chicken, which is very tasty. I had experienced one time, and this is really different from other chicken. Or in a local area, local experimental station in Kyushu, they also developing the type of the chicken that really have a different taste of meat. Not just marbling, but the meat cell itself is very tasty. They have a special breed and special program or feeding program to produce highest quality meat, and really expensive.
it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, and Andrew's saying maybe the same thing, this sort of economic and consumption questions may happen with other crops and agricultural products as well. Yeah. So if we are going to have a sustainable future, we should try and educate the consumers about
That's right.
the sustainable
Okay.
production. Yeah?
Um,
What's the most sustainable foods for us, the protein source? Grass-fed or what?
okay. From the ecological point of view, whatever is suitable, animals or grains that's suitable in that land, from the climate and soil, I didn't mention about the soil, but the soil conditions also affect temperature, precipitation, soil conditions. Those are the primary determinant of what we can produce in that land. And then if we take out, then we have to return in some way. So from the ecological point of view, we have produced whatever the most suitable product, both grains and animals, whatever, the product for the food. And then if they taken out, then equivalent amount should be returned to the place.
So like your first few slides, you talked about the natural development of ecological zones and food. Yeah.
Yeah. And like in case of Japan, when we are closing the country for about more than 200 years, the country was divided in more than 240 countries, 40 small countries, and then human movement was restricted among those so-called Han. It's a just like state. And that period, each local area developed a very special eating system, which is self-sustainable. And the movement of the movement of the material has been very, very limited. So, like Japan was subdivided more than 200 regions. And these days, we have some policy or the directions that to produce in the local and consume in the local, in the place. And that means it's a current motto. It's produce in the area and consume in the area. But by nature, it's returning to Edo period because it was subdivided into 200 some countries. And it seems that the tourism seems to have, should be based on the local, the people who attracted in particular area could go there. So the economical activity is stimulated by the movement of the tourists. So in the era of population decrease, probably the activity of each local area is dependent on how much that local area can attract the people.
So local products tend to be more sustainable.
Sustainable.
As the example showed.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I think that's a good lesson for us in the future, that we should try and be sustainable.
Now, Japan is facing it's really a transition period as far as agriculture is concerned, because after the Second World War, we've had a lot of Western influences, and then industry has developed quite, and then like Toyota companies, it's become a worldwide. Now, it's like the competition, world competitions is to how to gain the global market. Mm-hmm. But now, in one respect, car industry is, in one respect, it's worth the war because they are killing so many people everywhere. So that's negative aspect, right? Or the motorcycle. Yes. So we have to develop a human transport system that without hurting the other people. That's another aspect. Same thing happened for the agriculture. There's massive productions with a low cost, and then it seems like the US or Brazil is very strong as far as the economy is concerned. But in the long range, it's depleting the resources, land resources. So in the long range, it doesn't happen within the next few centuries, but eventually sometime if they continue to take out a nutrient out of the soil, then the nutrient or the water depletions, underground water depletion occur sometime.
Yeah.
So we have to balance them for the sustainable.
Yeah. So it's so that was in fact Milton was saying is it sustainable to have this kind of product? So the answer is locally yes.
But
What about genetically engineering animals for cellulose metabolism?
well, we're talking about green cow for many years.
Yeah.
Let them introduce the cellulosic,
Cellulase.
not cellulase or the green
Chlorophyll.
chlorophyll, yeah, like let have the green cow that has a chlorophyll in the skins, and then let's provide this carbon dioxide and water, and let them produce glucose in the body. Well, that's, I don't know if it's possible, but one of the things is to produce, let them produce glucose from the solar. The key is probably, I would think the key is how to use the solar energy.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yes, well, I just, in fact, I saw a poster in Daejeon, Korea 2 days ago in a climate technology conference, and the poster was describing a solar photovoltaic cell for medical implants in the human body.
Well,
And that you would actually the energy would be coming from the solar cell in the human body, powering the medical implant to save batteries. And it was sort of interesting that you'd have under the skin, but it wasn't based on chlorophyll, it was based on more on a nanotech or a photovoltaic catalyst under the skin.
That's
So
very interesting.
a cyborg who has a medical implant, but then the medical implant is powered by solar energy.
solar energy. Yeah.
So in the human body. It's-
That's very interesting.
So we might have shiny heads, or that have a solar energy on their head.
That's going to be interesting.
It's going to be interesting to take their hat off to get their charge.
That's interesting.
Andrew was saying in Thailand they have local agricultural products with no English translations, so it protects the local biodiversity because there's no global market pressure. Now you've been to Thailand at Sushi and you visited me at UNESCO a few times. Did you find some interesting things? You mentioned in Thailand the aspect is not much dependence on seasonality. I mean they have wet and dry season, but they can grow multiple crops of rice,
Yeah.
unlike Japan. Other observations you made from Thailand's agriculture?
Yeah, Thailand is very climatical conditions and the geographical conditions very different. They don't have high mountain in the area, so like one of the characteristics of Japan is the presence of the mountain right in the middle of the country that makes the climate from the both sides very much different. But in case of Thailand, they have a river, but not much really high mountains. That's fairly flat area that makes the people's life or the production system is, in a sense, very stable. In a sense, very stable and less seasonality. So they can produce agricultural products throughout the year. That makes the people, in a sense, they really do not have pressure from the climate compared to Japan, because like physically we don't have anything to eat in the winter, but like in Thailand or Indonesia or Philippines, the food is in a sense available throughout the year. That makes probably the cultures or human mind very much different in nature.
Mm. Yes, and I just came from Seoul yesterday,
yes.
and then they had the Kimchi Festival.
The Kimchi Festival.
So it's kimchi again, the seasonality.
That's right, and it's a preserved food. It's vegetables with red
Chili.
Yeah, so it's a preserved food. So the style of the preserved food vary among the regions, and then where vegetables is really product that you cannot preserve them long time as it is. So you have to either freeze after the electricity. The freezing is a very nice way, but before the age of freezing, then the people has to. The best way was to ferment them in a different system with lactobacillus, or like in case of natto, we have bacillus natto, either bacillus or lactobacillus. So,
And then fish were dried more than fermented, except for
okay.
sushi. Is that right?
no,
In
dried
Japan?
or the salt, put in the salt.
And of course, you can catch it throughout the year from the ocean.
But
Different types.
Yeah, different types, yes. And also shell too, yes. So the seasonality is there.
Mm.
Like this season we have, I don't know what to say, samba? I don't know what to say.
Mackerel.
No, mackerel. Samba, that's a long fish. Yes, we have least amount of that particular fish. It's special for the autumn. And we have very low fish this year.
And if a species requires constant human intervention, is it sustainable?
What, constant?
If we require constant human intervention to keep the species intervention, like management, and
Management?
is it sustainable?
I don't know. Depends on how we intervene.
It depends if our intervention is sustainable. If we live in an human agroforestry environment, then maybe we are.
Like, if there is 1 square kilometers of the land and only 1 people living,
Yeah.
the people can take something quite freely without disrupting the nature.
Mm.
But if 1,000 people live in one square kilometer
Mm.
and then taking out whatever they want, there's a destruction, right? So it's depending on how many people living in the particular given area and what they get out of the nature. It's depend on the situation, right?
Mm. And then there also is questions on one of the worst pressures in water management. And the government is subsidizing rice farmers in Thailand to switch to sugar. Is that a good move?
Well, I don't know. That's really. I think it's a really political. Yeah, but I've heard that the rice farmer, the profitability of the rice farmer in Thailand is very low. So they switching to the. I would imagine they're switching to the sugar, probably more profitable.
Mm.
But I think it depends on the place where if it is suitable. But sugar cane probably takes up a lot of nutrient out of the ground probably.
I see.
So like we are producing corn, but it's really the soil. Soil conditions getting worse and worse every year.
So it's better to import it from the US and degrade their soil.
In a sense, yeah.
In a sense,
But
yeah.
probably this is the matter of circulation. With in the city area, that nutrient is accumulated in the city area, so it has to the system to return the nutrient to the farm area.
Mm. Okay, we're having some comments here from Nota about sustainability. What happens if there's no water?
Wow.
Yeah.
No water.
So groundwater is depleting, but in Japan it's fortunate, as you showed on the map, it has lots of water.
That makes Japan very different from other area. The water is a key. Because as shown in the map.
And you showed that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Map of Japan. Okay, this is map of Japan, and the one of the characteristics of Japan as a country, from a geographical point of view, we have a mountain right in the middle of this island. The mountain, just like what we have from Hokkaido, and in the right middle of the, and then we have plain facing to the oceans on both
Yeah.
sides. And these mountains mainly serve as a reservoir of the water. In the Siberian high pressure, in the winter, there is a very strong wind from the Siberian. The Siberian high pressure has become very strong, and there is a wind from the continent, and they pass through the Sea of Japan. They absorb the moisture and hit the mountain. So they climb, and then snowfall. A tremendous snowfall in this area, in the place facing Sea of Japan. But after passing the mountain, it dries, and then this very dry wind is blowing in the Pacific Ocean side. And the snow accumulation in the mountains, they melt very slowly in the spring and summertime, and that makes so many rivers in the whole side. And paddy field is developed along the river basin. So, like from the northern end of the Honshu to Kyushu, almost all area of Japan, that rice is produced along the river basin. And that's what the nature of the Japanese culture is, to live together, like along the people living in one river basin. It's just like one family. And that created a society. And that society, rice farming society, is really important when the water resource is limited, like less rains or less snow at some time, so we have a drought. And then if like river water flow is limited particular year, then if there's not enough water supply to supply all the paddy field, then eldest person, most respected eldest person, decided which paddy field to supply the water, and then the people who produce the rice support other people that do not have the product. So like one river basin is just like a big family. So like if the one person did not follow the local rule, then that family is going to be neglected. So the like river basin is just like a big family. So that's the river basin is existing throughout the country, and that make a basic Japanese society. So the leadership in Japan is usually respected older person who has a lot of experience, and then has a lot of experience in handling to many different situations, and then he is respected so that people follow. This is what the leadership in Japan. This is exactly what's happened in the Japanese political system, right? All the leader, experienced leader, is looking around and then direct which way to go. Usually the person has to have the experience, but like in nomadic culture, probably it's different. The person who has ability to accumulate the informations and have the ability to make a decision which direction to go to oasis. Otherwise, we will be right in the middle of the desert and they die. So the person who can make right decision, right or left to the directions is probably the leader for the nomadic people. But in case of Japan, it's usually coming from the so-called water war. Water war, and so it's traditionally one of the biggest local conflict.
It's about water in Japan.
Water, yes.
So, yeah. So it's a model in the globe. We may have this. And it's also saying, we're talking about beef. They're saying that Brazilian beef is famous. Yeah, yeah. It's, but is Brazilian beef, it's grass-fed or grain-fed?
Both, I think.
Oh.
Yeah, because Brazil produces a lot of grain, so I think for the exporting purpose, probably they are feeding grain at the end.
And in New Zealand, it's largely grass-fed.
Largely grass-fed.
Yeah.
But now, like in the US or some other country trying to produce Japanese black, they brought the embryos and the semen of the Japanese black and produced a hybrid, and then try to produce a novel beef in like Australia and the US.
Yeah, it's not sufficient. Yeah, not sustainable. So. Does anyone else have any comments or questions? Rowan, Mizrat, Takako, Andrew, any comments? I think it's been a really interesting, and maybe we can in another lecture talk about some of the historical aspects, but the history of agriculture and the development of any culture is linked, and the sustainability questions are really interesting. So do you think Japan will keep on growing rice because it's sustainable as compared to potatoes or wheat? Rice that suits the Japanese climate.
It has improved to be sustainable. We've been doing for 2,000 years, and there is no land irrigation. So rice production seems to be most suitable in most area of the river basins. But in particular land where the rice is not suitable, then like other product is it seems to be potatoes or like wheat or some other product is more suitable than rice. In those places, but it's better to produce product other than rice.
And so so what animal is most suited to Japan still? Is it pigs? Or
that's difficult questions. It depends. Pig is one of the wild boar is there. Wild boar has been there in Japan for many places. So I think for the vegetation point of view, wild boar, the pig is one of the things. But current pig productions is not related to the local. It's more grain-fed. The imported imported grain. So the current pig production is not really ecologically feasible. With the decrease of the population, what I would imagine is, with the decrease of the Japanese populations, that means the idling field or idling residential area will increase. That means it is going to be a chance for for Japan to increase the local agricultural products. I think that the industry started to invest to the local area to produce very tasty and environmental friendly agricultural product, and then they then produce it and then put it to the national transportation system, the circulation system. So, and I would think in the next 50 to 100 years, if the human training program for like Malaysia, for the agricultural field, if we could successfully retrain the agriculture of nature, and then has connected with like 7-Elevens or like those supermarket, then it's going to be a big chance to increase the local agricultural product and then put into the nationwide or maybe international market. With the decrease of the population, from my perspective, 127 million people is too much for the land area. That's why we have to import so much food. Right. So and then with the land area of Japan, I'm talking with several people that like during the 200 some years of the closing country during between 1600 to 1800, the population was 32 billion. 32 billion constant. So it has been proven that we can self-support the 32 million people without practically no trade. That has been proven. So, but without trade, it's not realistic in the current situation. So, like it seems that like 50 million to 60 million with trade seems to be feasible number of the people with the population and with this land area. So, like this last month, I think this is really scary thing compared with this. It is going to be that in the middle estimate is 1/2. But think that in the 1970, the 1870, right after the Meiji Restoration, was 34 million. This is practically no trade. Then the middle of the 60 million seems to be 50 to 60 million population. But most of the European countries is between the 40 to 60 million people. I think none of the country in Europe has more than 10 million, 100 million.
Yep.
None of the European countries.
So it becomes a stable size for a country.
Stable size for the country, which
Which
is to be between 50 to this range seems to be more feasible, so the population. But the problem is the age distribution is like this, like reverse triangle. The more aged people than young people. So the biggest issue as far as the population is concerned is from the next 100 years, how to soft land to the triangle with the total population of 60 million. That's going to be a major issue of human population, the residential population issue in Japan. How to soft land, how to...
Well, it's also very interesting in terms of global goals, because if we have global goals, that we have one country, ideal country size, 60 million or 50 million, politically, agriculturally, economically, then around the world we might have that. But then you have some very small countries who geographically are isolated, so that may be natural. Others which are splitting into population group or indigenous group. And then several mega countries, and a few countries with huge population growth currently, which are becoming. And what will happen to them is they'll have water wars or maybe split. So in the long term, in a couple hundred years, we may see this coming back. I mean, Japan is interesting because it's an island, so it naturally has natural boundaries.
That's right.
But of course, originally there were Ainu and Hokkaido, and then Japan invaded. So it's a sort of you take over land at different times. It's sort of interesting. But yes, it's an interesting question for social sustainability and political sustainability in the long term. Okay, well, thank you very much. I think everyone says thank you so much for your talk. Been studying hard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.